So I'm with Glen Miranker.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's a delight to have you here in Minneapolis on the campus of the university. We've had some great times together over the last few days in conjunction with an exhibition that you and your wife Kathy put together called Sherlock Holmes in 221 Objects. Where did the idea for that originate?
Well, the idea to do an exhibition at all actually came about some years ago when the Grow the Club board was visiting in San Francisco, and they came and they paid Kathy and I a visit and visited, and we of course spent the bulk of the time in the library looking at books. And Bruce Crawford said, well, this is great, you have to bring this to the Grow Club. And so the idea of putting on an exhibition at all was his, really, his impetus. And we got started working on it, about the beginning of the pandemic.
You've been collecting, take a step back, for
1976, so that's
the bicentennial.
Yes, easy. It's easy. It's easy for me to remember because of that. It's also when Kathy and I were married, so it's also easy for me to remember our anniversary. But yeah, that's what, 24. That's 46 years.
What got you going? What was the spark?
Well, actually, it was a gift from Kathy. I had already evinced quite an interest in Sherlock, but it was the stories, it was the character, it was the Victorian age. I fell in love with the stories. I had chanced upon these groups of like-minded folks who had got together with some frequency called Sherlockians or Baker Street Irregulars. Found them bright, passionate, engaging, and so I basically fell in with a bad lot. But I was not a collector. My Sherlock Holmes library consisted of the 2-volume Doubleday, and I was in grad school. Kathy and I were recently married. I was home some Saturday working on my thesis, no doubt grumbling away. Kathy decided to go out for a walk, and she comes back from the walk and says, I brought you a present to cheer you up. And she hands me this American first edition of the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes, and a light bulb went off. I looked at this book and I looked at Kathy and I said, you don't have to be J.P. Morgan to collect books? This was a revelation to me. And she shared how she had, by chance, came upon a small antiquarian book fair in the basement of the Gutman Library at Harvard. And I said, wow, well, is it open tomorrow? Can we go tomorrow? And being Sunday, I was skeptical. But no, as most people who collect books know, Saturday, Sunday is a pretty typical run for a book show. And so we went the next day, and she brings me up to the very table where she had acquired the book. It was in the stall of a antiquarian bookseller named Peter Stern, whose name is probably familiar to many of the folks. And so the preeminent dealer in detective fiction and Sherlock Holmes. And also at the table at the same time was a fellow named Dan Poznansky, who introduced himself, and there has been no greater collector of Sherlock than Dan. Might have his equal, I'm skeptical, but certainly no greater. And so I met these two gentlemen at the very, very beginning. They proved to be extraordinarily generous with their time and knowledge, and cemented my gentle madness.
Generosity seems to be one of the threads of what it means to be a collector. How would you define who is a collector, or what is a collector?
That's a good and a difficult question, but certainly I think that a collector has to have a passion and curiosity for some particular area of history, information, literature, and do good intellectual work in that area. Finding things that are meaningful, that go together, that tell a story. And I think collectors also need to keep in mind that we're mere custodians of these objects. They're only ours for as long as we live, and they're going to go someplace else. And so, one, taking proper care of them, and two, being active, being generous, and sharing what you find, what you know, what you learn. That's such a rewarding activity. I can't imagine a collector not actively doing that.
Yeah, we are thrilled beyond. I can't even find the words how excited I am that we'll have 221 objects, and that was a bit of I won't say a struggle. It was a joy for you to go through your collection and pick those things out.
The first step was actually to check on the exhibition space and guess as to how many items could be attractively displayed, and it came to about 200. And Holmes and Watson having shared rooms at 221B Baker Street, then of course the number had to be 221. I did contemplate for a while sawing some item in half and making it Sherlock Holmes and 221B items, but I decided in the end not to do that. So that's how 221 came about. And then it was very important to me to tell a story, to have the exhibition tell a story or two about publication history, about the birthing and creation and life of these stories, and not to be a too superficial, broad-brushed. These are some interesting Sherlock Holmes books. And so it was apparent that the scope had to somehow be limited, and basically arbitrarily settled on the stories from the very first Sherlock Holmes stories through the publication of The Return. It finished around 1908, and that was I thought a particularly fascinating. It was not the whole period of the creation of the Sherlock Holmes stories. That went on to the late 20s. Mm-hmm. But it's a particularly interesting one, covering from the very first Holmes story through his apparent return from the dead in the collection of short stories known as The Return.
Mm-hmm. And in the midst of that time frame, we also have your very favorite and many people's very favorite Sherlock Holmes story.
My absolute favorite story is The Hound of the Baskervilles. I think it's unbelievably atmospheric. The mystery itself is fascinating. Conan Doyle's skill at telling a tale and conjuring up a time and a place and a feel is remarkable. And is remarkable overall, and is no better done in any of his writing than it is in The Hound.
Yeah.
So The Hound prominently features. The Hound is in fact the start, so to speak, of the layout. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to be respectful of the people that I hoped would actually come and see the exhibit, and I expected that not all of them would be Sherlock Holmes scholars.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought an inviting and gentle way to bring them into the exhibition would be to start with the Hound, because it's familiar to almost everybody on the planet.
Right, yeah. And you give us the Hound in the UK, you give us the Hound in the United States, and you also give us something that's so well known to so many people in the same space that you give us something that most of us had never ever seen before. An amazing multi-page manuscript that I sat in front of. It was at the far end of the room, as I remember, in the Grolier Club.
That's actually one of my favorite items. Arthur Conan Doyle gave a speech at the Authors Club in London in June of 1895. He had become sort of the recognized de facto leader, certainly of the younger authors. And he was asked to give a talk. And he assembled this talk called The Work of Literature. And in a sentence or two, it is a wonderful speech. It really shows Arthur Conan Doyle's character, his good nature, his somewhat self-effacing humor, and his attitude and aspirations about the work that he and his fellow authors did. So the speech, as I said, was delivered in 95 and reported on the newspapers as club activities typically were, and then it just sort of disappeared. And it showed up at an auction in Sotheby's in 2004, and I was able to add it to my collection. To change direction just a little bit, speech has several particular phrases, insights into which I particularly like. Towards the beginning, Conan Doyle remarks that he would like to say that he was led into the field of letters by a cheering ambition, but I fear it is more correct to say I was driven in by a howling creditor. And then later on in the speech, he says, I have been much upbraided for having killed Sherlock Holmes. This is 1895. Holmes apparently met his demise in 1893 in the case The Final Problem, toppling over Reichenbach Falls in the arms of his arch nemesis, Professor James Moriarty.
Of evil repute.
Of evil memory.
Yes.
And so he was apparently gone, and Conan Doyle says that I've been much upbraided for having put that gentleman to death, but I claim it was justifiable homicide and self-defense, for if I had not killed him, he would have killed me. There are any number of references in his letters, in his autobiography, in this speech, that Conan Doyle did not want to spend his time, creative energy, emotional energy on this guy, Sherlock Holmes. He had other aspirations for his literary endeavors. He wanted to write historical novels. He wanted to write Gothic novels, but he didn't want to write Sherlock Holmes stories. And he makes it painfully clear.
And again, I can't tell you how excited I am that Minnesota is hosting Sherlock Holmes in 221 objects.
Minnesota is a absolutely fabulous, in my view, an absolutely fabulous venue. I mean, not only is the Sherlockian, the Doylean collection here preeminent, but you have the Norwegian explorers here, one of the oldest science societies, and in my opinion, one of the it has one of the most distinguished publication histories. It's not only long, but, and I don't mean any disrespect, but it's atypically good in the space of Sherlockian critical literature.
Glen, it's great to have you here. Thank you for this time.
Thank you. I'm most pleased to be here.